Hello, good afternoon. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026. The time is 4:30 p.m., and I am in Miami-Dade County, Florida. The topic of today's lecture is MK Ultra Part 3, Further Examinations. And I'll have you know, ladies and gentlemen, that I tend to do these lectures outdoors, so I may have to raise or project my voice from time to time in order to drown out the background noise. Please adjust your volumes accordingly, and thank you for tuning in. I would like to begin this lecture, as I have so many others, ladies and gentlemen, by addressing separate matters. The matter that I'm going to address presently, before we get into the main talking points of Project MK Ultra Part 3, is some of the street theater that I've been seeing recently concerning sort of this us versus them load of camel excrement, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'm seeing in street theater is I'm seeing messages that are being relayed to me from certain congressional members that are getting ready to start issuing these divergent, antagonistic narratives about what I do and what I say, which is unfortunate. As far as I'm concerned, the Congress of the United States ought to be thanking me for my hard work in identifying and exposing clandestine gang stalking in the way that I have so very publicly. And they should be inviting me to the Capitol building and issuing me a Congressional Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor that can be bestowed upon a United States citizen in these times, ladies and gentlemen. Because I've made not only America safer with my work, but I've made the global community safer with my work. And the reason I've made the global community safer with my work is because I've given the global community a definitive blueprint as to how to identify, document, avoid, and yes, get the better of clandestine gang stalking, ladies and gentlemen, the quintessential political topic of the 21st century. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, if I were a U.S. citizen that knew nothing about gang stalking at all, and I happened to be browsing the internet one day, and I happened to stumble across the EIS Media Group lecture series, and I was able to tune in to high quality content concerning the clandestine gang stalking mechanism, I, as a member of the global community, would be very, very satisfied with what I saw. And I would be very appreciative at this man for bringing this matter, this potentially hazardous, potentially devastating matter, this program, to the attention of the global community. But, ladies and gentlemen, you must understand something. This country that we live in, ladies and gentlemen, the United States, it's a little prideful. Far be it from them to congratulate a citizen, a lifelong citizen of the United States, who managed to single-handedly put into a chokehold a beast, a leviathan, a 10-headed hydra called clandestine gang stalking and grab it right by the hairs of its very head, wrestle it to the ground, render it unconscious, dissect it with surgical precision, and relay its mechanisms and auspices to the entire world. Ladies and gentlemen, so you can be safer, so your communities can be safer, so your countries can be safer, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm talking to my viewers around the world. I'd like to thank you for tuning in tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully this country comes to its senses and banishes all practices that are reminiscent of clandestine gang stalking, not only for your good, but for my good and for the good of the global community. It's a national security product turned sour, and it is a act of governmental negligence and malfeasance, quite frankly. And no, it isn't a game that we all play together. And no, this isn't a pick your side and run with the races type of thing. All right, this isn't the Kentucky Derby, ladies and gentlemen, where you pick a horse, you place a bet on it, and you hope your horse wins. Okay, if there are people on the outside monitoring my trajectory through this mortal world as a targeted individual while placing bets as to how I deal with this problem or what will befall me if I don't expose clandestine gang stalking, or what the Congress of the United States reaction will be, or what the Supreme Court's of the United States reaction will be, okay, or what the general public of the United States reaction will be to this. You all aren't placing bets on these things at casinos. Okay, this is not a game, ladies and gentlemen. This is history in the making. Okay, 50, 100, 1,000 years from now, ladies and gentlemen, people around the world are going to look back on these times in history books and in documentaries, and they're going to say, you know what? Wow, what a time to be alive. We are going to learn from those instances. We are going to learn from those political misgivings. We are going to learn from that radio commentator, E.I. Smith. We are going to learn from the gang stalkers. We're going to learn from targeted individuals around the world what it truly means to be a citizen in a country, what it means to have freedoms, and what it means to be a citizen of a global community, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, what does it mean to be a government? What does it mean to govern successfully? What does it mean to govern with virtue? Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're talking about today. And ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about some more interesting topics concerning Project MK Ultra. Ladies and gentlemen, this is part 3 of Project MK Ultra. This topic is a topic of particular importance to me because it involves human experimentation, plain and simple. There's no way around it. And this human experimentation took place right here in the United States. Taxpayer dollars were used to fund these experiments. Some of these experiments ended in people getting sick. Some of these experiments ended in United States citizens going crazy. Some of these experiments ended in the demise of U.S. citizens, all for research purposes, ladies and gentlemen. Also, the CIA could sit back, kick its heels up on a mahogany desk, and say, That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We know more about human behavior now than we did before this project started. We know more now about what makes people tick than we did before this project started. We know more about human behavior, human mechanisms, human movements now than before this project started. And they were basically saying, you know what? $3 million, $5 million, $10 million, $20 million in taxpayer resources going to these experiments is worth it. The sickness, the disease, the malfeasance, the devastation, and the death to United States citizens across this land during this project, Project MK Ultra, was worth it. Why? Because now the U.S. federal establishment knows better how to manipulate people, to harm people, to cause biological harm to people, to make people sick. We know how to harass people better. And as you will see in a number of these articles, we know how to kill people without leaving a trace of evidence. All in the name of civil justice, civil rights, good governance, rule of law, and constitutionalism, ladies and gentlemen. So here's what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to dig right in. We are going to start with the Baltimore Sun article dated August 10th, 1977. And mind you, ladies and gentlemen, you must understand, okay? I'm harsh, and I acknowledge that I'm harsh. But I'm harsh because gangstalking itself is harsh. Okay? I have to communicate these matters with the timeliness, the sense of urgency, and the respect to significance that this deserves. Okay? I never asked to be a human experiment. And quite frankly, I never asked to be a test study. And the reason I've never asked to be a test study is because I got stuff to do, ladies and gentlemen. And furthermore, when you do a test study on a person, whether you're in a government role or not, if you decide to do a test study on a person, if you decide to use a person, a human, a living, breathing human being, as an experiment of some kind, it's polite to pay them for their labor. Okay? If I'm an experiment of some kind, I've been working for 30 years for free. What kind of life is that? Okay? This isn't a game, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? It's not a game of hockey. It's not a foot race. It's not a game of soccer. Okay? It's not a game of professional golf where scores are kept and everyone goes into this thing wide open. One day you wake up and you're in this thing, and there are the various hazards that go into it. There are various hazards and there are various perils and dangers that you have to face on a daily basis with this in these projects. And you know, this is not out of, I don't do this project out of a disdain for the many soldiers worldwide, okay, who have dedicated their time and their resources to American conflicts that they have found themselves in over the past 250 years. As a matter of fact, the soldiers, particularly those who went to war on behalf of this country worldwide that perished, are rolling in their graves because they're saying, is this what we gave our lives for, having left our families and our kids, some of us, to go to war for a country that was going to, rather than afford people their freedoms, thwart those freedoms with programs like clandestine gangstalking? It just boggles the mind, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not a soldier in the U.S. Army. I went through the process in my youth. There were some disagreements as to my role. But, ladies and gentlemen, patriotism is not something that you can take on and put on and take off like a sweater. Either you're a patriot or you're not a patriot. Okay? And quite frankly, E.I. Smith, your host, is one of the most concrete examples of patriotism that you'll ever see. And the reason is because dissent, patriotic dissent, is a form of patriotism. And I want to see the United States do well, whether or not I remain a U.S. citizen. Okay, if I decide to defect to another country, it doesn't mean that I hate America or that I hate its citizens. It's just sort of a mutual, what do you call it? Just a mutual agreement between me and my country that I'm not a good fit for America. That's fine. Okay, if I got taxpayer resources being used at the federal, state, and local levels that are being aimed at solely disenfranchising me at every turn, even to the point of physical terror against my person, well, maybe it's time to split the sheets, as they say, and for me in the United States to part ways. Because I've been a targeted individual, ladies and gentlemen, as far as I can tell, for 30 years. If the United States is saying to me, Mr. Smith, why don't you spend the next 30 years as our guinea pig or as our test subject for more clandestine gangstalking operations, I'm going to have to reject that offer. Okay, either stop the program or me, your host, I'm going to have to go to another country, and I'm talking any country that will accept me. I'm not picky. Just any country that I can go to where I'm not a targeted individual. Because quite frankly, this is getting more disturbing by the day, ladies and gentlemen. These stalkers, they retreat and then they come back. They retreat and then they come back. They retreat and then they come back. So they've retreated to some degree over the past month, but now they're back in full force. That's a battle strategy. If my stalkers have to retreat and then gather themselves and then re-advance, that's a war. Okay, that's a war being waged on a U.S. citizen. And we're going to get into other ways that the U.S. has waged wars on the populace of this country. The first article is going to be from the Baltimore Sun. The date on this article is August 10th, 1977. And mind you, ladies and gentlemen, we're going back in time a little bit because MK Ultra is the last fully documented instance of the U.S. federal government authorizing state-sanctioned experiments on its citizens. This program has been documented thoroughly in articles, books, journals, and interviews, news interviews, and also Senate and congressional hearings. Ladies and gentlemen, my hope is that one day clandestine gang stalking becomes equally as studied and documented as is MK Ultra and as is COINTELPRO, and that one day people around the world will be able to go online or go to peer-reviewed journals or go to books and magazines of a political nature and read openly as to how the U.S. federal establishment authorized, financed, implemented, and directed clandestine gang stalking, which is obviously a human behavior experimentation procedure similar to MK Ultra. Patriotism here is not rolling with the punches. Patriotism here is dissenting and using my First Amendment rights to expose this menace. The title of this article is "The CIA to Trim 800 Workers in Clandestine Operations," and I'm going to read this article, and we are going to examine it. Um, this is out of Washington. The writer of this article is Ernest B. Ferguson uh, of the Washington Bureau of the Sun, the Baltimore Sun. Adam Stansfield Turner, this is the beginning of the article, newly granted greater authority than any intelligence director in American history, disclosed yesterday a wholesale cutback in the Central Intelligence Agency Clandestine Operations Division. The director also said that he has ordered a high-priority crackdown on news leaks and security lapses in the nation's spy apparatus. In addition, the admiral said flatly that the U.S. intelligence community has not bugged South Korea's Blue House or taped conversations by its president, Park Chung-hee. Such allegations have been made in connection with the bribery scandal surrounding the Korean businessman Tong Sung Park. Admiral Turner made known that the CIA would undertake a major slimming effort by letting go more than 800 employees in the super-secret Directorate of Operations, which he described as the heart of the agency. They will be laid off mostly by normal attrition, he said, rather than by firing. The Admiral explained that the Operations Division has grown tremendously during the Vietnam War and that its field staff had already been reduced. Now the Directorate headquarters staff will follow. This reduction is believed to involve about 15% of the entire Operations Division's payroll. Admiral Turner did not connect the reduction with any of the recent controversies in which the agency has been embroiled. At breakfast with reporters, the Admiral said that not only espionage but intentional and accidental leaks of information already have done permanent damage to the national intelligence effort. He disclosed that he had started a series of surprise investigations of security practices at private firms working under contract with the CIA and found faulty procedures for handling secret material. In the future, he warned, those intelligence contractors had better realize that their contracts depend on their observance of security rules. The agency does business with defense industries as well as with private think tanks and universities, among others. The Admiral did not specify individual firms that had been investigated. One recent espionage case involved the sale of secret data to the Russians by employees of TRW Systems, Incorporated, a major supplier of reconnaissance satellites for the CIA. An employee and an accomplice were convicted of spying in Los Angeles in April. In June, a former CIA staff member here was sentenced to life imprisonment for attempting to sell the names of hundreds of covert personnel to Soviet agents. Admiral Turner said both of these cases had done very considerable damage to the intelligence program. As an example of a damaging news link, he referred to reports that Jordan's King Hussein had received payments from the CIA for many years for his help in the Middle East. A number of people already working for the agency abroad have said, "I can't work for you if my name is going to be in the press tomorrow," the director asserted. This news leak has done some permanent damage and is likely to cause more, he said. Admiral Turner told reporters that he was trying to tighten control of secrets by pushing more material into the unclassified category, making it available to the public, and thus theoretically creating a more respectful attitude towards properly classified matter. He also said that considering administrative, civil, and criminal sanctions against those who illegally disclosed secrets. Last week, President Jimmy Carter gave the Admiral, his Naval Academy classmate, budget and task-setting authority over the whole intelligence establishment. This was considered a victory for Admiral Turner over Harold Brown, the Secretary of Defense, his rival for domination of the national spy machinery. But the Admiral described it yesterday as a middle ground solution of intelligence reorganization. He predicted that in the coming years, efforts will be directed towards more economic information and proportionately less about communist nations. When asked whether the CIA had eavesdropped on President Park, the Admiral declared that he spoke for the entire intelligence community in saying no. He avoided elaboration. During the congressional investigation of the Tong Sung Park story, there have been reports that such eavesdropping has linked President Park with Tong Sung Park, who left this country as the probe was beginning. Admiral Turner said he is notifying all universities involved of the unwitting association with the secret MKUltra program, which included testing drugs on human subjects. But he said that the great majority of the 149 projects on that list were ones in which children could safely be involved. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot to unpack here. As I often say, ladies and gentlemen, I invite viewers from the United States and around the world to look at these lectures and listen to them and absorb the material being taught so that you yourself can apply these lectures to your general worldview. This is important, okay? Because as you can see, MKUltra has an international effect, okay? So it is important for international viewers and listeners to be aware of these things. And I invite international viewers and listeners, and I invite American viewers and listeners to hear and understand these things of all levels. Civilians, law enforcement, military personnel, elected officials, anybody who thinks that they can benefit from these matters, listen in, ladies and gentlemen. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to unpack this piece by piece, okay? There's a lot to unpack here, okay? Essentially, the CIA is in damage control mode here because the auspices of MKUltra were made public in such a way so as to confuse the narrative of this noble, research-based data gathering experiment that the CIA has dubbed MKUltra. Okay, it's being called other things now in congressional testimonies, Senate testimonies, in scientific journals, in biological research journals, in political magazines, in the political domain in the United States. Okay, and even among the general populace, it's being looked at as sort of a mad scientist, evil experiment on the United States population. And you know, this poor guy, Admiral Stansfield Turner, I mean, all of this is falling on his shoulders as the director of the CIA. I mean, every congressional hearing on this matter, every Senate hearing on this matter, every news story on this matter, every newspaper article on this matter, all of this stuff is falling squarely on an Admiral Turner's shoulders. And, you know, he has to sort of, without calling the program outright egregious and condemning it outright, making the CIA look shameful, he's doing his best to sort of put a lid on the PR damage that this program, MKUltra, has the potential to do, not only to the CIA, but to the United States federal establishment at large. Okay? So many articles you're going to read, about MKUltra is going to mention this guy. And he has to answer for it because he's the director of the CIA while these projects are going on. Very accomplished man. Admiral Stansfield Turner, probably the most professionally accomplished CIA director that we've ever had in this country. I mean, his military resume is stellar. Okay, he is the quintessential defense man in the entire country, and it's unfortunate that someone so accomplished in matters of national defense has to oversee a CIA that put together such an egregiously inept program like this. But ladies and gentlemen, you live and you learn. I mean, this program helps give us insights into clandestine gangstalking as well. So the CIA under Admiral Turner is getting ready to cut 800 workers in its clandestine operations department. All right, it's not even necessarily about cutting costs. That's the unusual thing about this. They're not cutting costs to save money. They're cutting costs because so many of their operatives have been spilling the beans about MK Ultra. And the word is getting out about this very secret, very clandestine program that uses human beings, particularly U.S. citizens, as experiments for these mind-bogglingly bad programs and these horribly destructive programs. So he's purging the CIA. Okay, he's getting rid of people left and right out of fear that more of this program is going to get out. And as you can see, a big part of this controversy is whether or not the president of South Korea, okay, Park Chung-hee, was spied on by the CIA in his official offices. You see, South Korea has the Blue House. That's the official office of the president of South Korea. Just like the White House is the official office of the executive of the president of the United States. So there was this big controversy as to whether or not the CIA was spying on President Chung-hee. President Chung-hee in his offices in South Korea. Admiral Turner is saying no, that we were not spying on the president. But obviously that's a lie. They were spying on President Chung-hee, gathering secrets about his operations there in South Korea. I mean, at the time, South Korea was of interest to the United States. At the time this article was written, we were only about 25 years removed from the start of the Korean War. So of course Korea and its neighboring countries were being watched by the CIA, by the U.S. federal establishment. I mean, you know, it's not like today where every president in the world, every king in the world, every queen in the world, every monarch in the world, every prime minister in the world, every politician in the world expects a measure of spying. I think we're at that point where everyone realizes that everything they say is possibly being recorded and is possibly being listened to. And as a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, I got people right now listening to me live using spying equipment in a deleterious fashion. I mean, I have undercover operatives right now that are allowing my enemies a live feed to this lecture. And I realize that. But I also realize that I have positive listeners as well that may be listening to this live. Persons from America and around the world that appreciate what's being said. I welcome them, but you undercover operatives, the ones that I've referred to so many times as zoo animals, and these little punk ass consorts that you bring around me in an attempt to disrupt my lecture and belittle what I do, you all can get lost. You all can catch this on YouTube or on Facebook. Okay, people who approach my project with a sense of responsibility, I welcome you. But again, you disruptive listeners, especially the undercover ones, the undercover operatives that I call out so often. You know, you guys are better off going home and playing Donkey Kong on your computer, or whatever your preferred video game system is. Just go home and play a game of Donkey Kong, undercovers, and take your consorts with you. All right, go home and grab some Cool Whip. Okay, put it on some chocolate ice cream, stir it up real good, make a chocolate shake, maybe put some bananas in it. I mean, you're playing Donkey Kong, right? So maybe, while you're playing the role of the gorilla on Donkey Kong, the video game, stir up some bananas in that shake in honor of Donkey Kong, your hero, right? Then take that shake, take it down in one swig, and just play some Donkey Kong, you and your consorts. And maybe wait another 48 hours and catch this lecture on YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, so these CIA workers are being laid off, and it's basically suspicions of improper handling of CIA material, there's also a concern that there are CIA agents selling government secrets to the Soviet government, the USSR. I mean, listen, ladies and gentlemen, this article was written about 15 years removed from the beginning of the Cold War. The USA and Russia are not friends at this particular time in history. And the Soviets spied on the United States, and the United States spied on the Soviets. That was just the relationship they had with each other. It was a big spy game. And the United States paid Soviet spies for information, and the Soviets paid American spies for information. It was considered high treason. And if you were caught selling secrets to the Soviets, just as if the Soviets caught you selling secrets to the U.S., it was the death penalty right on the spot. Okay, you weren't killed on the spot, but you were, at some point, you were executed by the state for high treason, for selling U.S. secrets to American adversaries. So there's also a concern that MK Ultra did irrevocable damage to the image of the CIA, and it did. I mean, the CIA was at one time considered one of the most sophisticated law enforcement agencies in the world. But MK Ultra damaged that image. MK Ultra damaged the CIA's claim to being the most sophisticated law enforcement agency in the world. MK Ultra damaged that irrevocably. I mean, if the CIA were to ever stand up and say, you know what, we are the most sophisticated law enforcement agency in the world. We are the most sophisticated governmental agency in the world. And we are the most sophisticated governmental auxiliary in history. All you'd have to do is go dig up some MK Ultra videos of mine that would prove otherwise. All you got to do is go find some newspaper clippings of what the CIA authorized in MK Ultra. You see, that's the harm that a program like this can do to a government. You see, Admiral Turner himself is saying here, we are afraid that this program and the leaking of its information has done irreparable harm. That means permanent damage to the image of the CIA. Now, did the CIA learn from MK Ultra? No. Now it's doing gang stalking as if everyone's forgotten about MK Ultra. Oh, MK Ultra, that was 50 years ago. Let's put up a new program. We'll call it Project Gangstalking. We'll use the same exact mechanisms that we did 50 years ago in MK Ultra, and we'll hope nobody discovers about it. We'll hope nobody talks about it. No one will ever figure it out. We'll do it. We'll use citizens this time. Rather than CIA spies, we'll use citizens this time. No one will ever tell on each other here. And now it looks like more damage is going to be done to the image and reputation of this country because of gang stalking, which is essentially the progeny of MK Ultra. So I mean, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, now he's talking about the King of Jordan, which is a Middle Eastern country that's south of Syria, if I'm not mistaken. He's talking about Jordan was a CIA asset. The King of Jordan, King Hussein, they're saying he was a CIA asset and that he was receiving payments from the CIA in exchange for information about stuff that was going on in the Middle East. Okay, so the King of Jordan was a strategic asset for the CIA. Okay, fine. All right, but I mean, how does something like that get out? Now he's not a strategic asset anymore. Now all America's enemies in the Middle East know, hey, King Hussein, he's an American, he's a bought and paid for American agent. Now the whole landscape of the Middle East changes. It's because these CIA agents were leaking information about the CIA to the press, to the public. They were selling this information to the Soviets. And the information about MK Ultra was getting out. And it was doing colossal embarrassments to the image of the CIA. And Admiral Turner was apparently in some sort of a competition with Harold Brown, the Secretary of Defense, for supremacy over the spying elements of MK Ultra, and indeed the entire CIA. And apparently President Jimmy Carter sided with Stansfield Turner over Harold Brown, probably because of the difference in, I mean, mind you, Harold Brown had, as the Secretary of Defense, was essentially the chief defense minister of the United States, but his experience as the Secretary of Defense paled in comparison to Admiral Stansfield Turner's experience in the U.S. Navy, in the U.S. Department of Defense, and as the head of the CIA. Stansfield just simply had more hands-on experience than Harold Brown did with respect to government operations, period. So I think President Carter made the choice based on the admiral's more impressive resume in governmental matters. Although I think a smarter decision at this point would have been to nominate Harold Brown as the top decision maker of spying and intelligence, because I think at this point, this program having been exposed the way it did, I think at this point it just would have made more sense to start with a fresh or a blank slate and allow Harold Brown to take the reins of the program, or what was left of it, and just retire Admiral Turner, because, you know, at this point he was the embattled Admiral Turner. You see, he was seen as overseeing the most egregiously mismanaged CIA in the country's history. And I think that getting rid of Admiral Turner was his best move at this point. Maybe reinstalling, or rather nominating a new head of the CIA, starting over, and a change in direction with respect to the CIA and its operations, and then allowing Harold Brown to step in over the spying and intelligence apparatus of the federal government, and just turn a new leaf. But instead, President Jimmy Carter wanted Admiral Turner to stay on board as the head of the thing, and we saw that it was just disaster after disaster. Now, I typically like Jimmy Carter, and I think that his decisions were typically good decisions, but absolutely not here. I mean, you have to thank Admiral Turner for his service, and get a different CIA chief, and so that this matter is given a clean slate, and then you let Harold Brown take over as the intelligence director. So we're going to move on to the next article, ladies and gentlemen. CIA data shows a 14-year plan on controlling human behavior. This is an article that is from the New York Times, dated July 21st of 1977. It's written by Nicholas M. Horrock, special to the New York Times. This is apparently a program that attracted a lot of attention from the news media once it was discovered. And the reason it attracted a lot of attention from the news media is because America had not seen such a scandal involving its intelligence departments or agencies. They'd seen scandals involving the military. For example, the search and destroy operations that the U.S. Armed Services ran in Vietnam, for example. A number of those programs, John Kerry, the future political candidate, spoke out about. And we'd seen scandals involving the U.S. military, but never a scandal involving the CIA or the Departments of Defense or the Departments of Justice until now. So this article is from July 21st of 1977. It begins Washington, July 20th. The Central Intelligence Agency conducted a 14-year program to find ways to control human behavior through the use of chemical, biological, and radiological material. According to agency documents made public today by John Marks, a freelance journalist, Mr. Marks, an associate of the Center for National Security Studies, asserted at a news conference that Admiral Stansfield Turner, Director of Central Intelligence, in a letter to Senate Select Committee on Intelligence last week, seriously distorted what the CIA research programs involved. Mr. Marks said that based on documents about the program he had received under the Freedom of Information Act, he concluded that Admiral Turner seems to be practicing what used to be called a modified limited hangout. When he called the agency's activity a program of experimentation with drugs. To be sure, drugs were part of it, he said, but so were such other techniques as electric shock, radiation, ultrasonic, psychosurgery, psychology, and incapacitating agents, all of which were referred to in documents that I have received. The documents made public today and the disclosure by the CIA last week that it had found another cache of previously undiscovered records and suggested broader experimentation on unwitting humans by the intelligence agency or its paid researchers than had been publicly known before. Mr. Marks said that he obtained or read about 1,000 CIA documents, many of which were never turned over to the Senate Intelligence Committee for its 1975 investigation of agency activities. CIA spokesman declined comment on Mr. Marks' charges. However, Admiral Turner told newsmen after leaving a meeting with senators that the agency was moving swiftly to review the documents that it had found. I'm going to do some paraphrasing, and we're going to move down this article to some of the key points. In a letter from an unnamed CIA officer in 1949, it was discussed ways of killing people without leaving a trace. I believe that there are two chemical substances which would be most useful in that they would leave no characteristic pathological findings, and the quantities needed could be easily transported to places where they were used, the letter said. The letter also suggested exposure of individuals to X-rays, subjecting a person to cold environments in which he would freeze to death. Or if these methods were too difficult, two methods needing no special equipment would be to smother the victim with a pillow or strangle him with a wide piece of cloth, such as a bath towel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there before we continue reading, because there are many elements that constitute this article, and we are going to unpack them piece by piece. So what's happening here is that there is a man named Mr. Marks, who is an associate of the National Center for National Security Studies, who took an intense personal interest in MK Ultra. And essentially what he's saying is this: that he's disgusted as a United States citizen at how vague and how underhandedly Admiral Turner has handled information concerning MK Ultra. See, Admiral Turner has essentially, in his own words, minimized the human behavior experimentation element of MK Ultra, and he's basically trying to make it all about drugs. Okay, that's all MK Ultra is. It was about experimenting on people with LSD. It was about experimenting on people with acid. It was about experimenting on people with mushrooms. Okay, that's all it was. We were just seeing how different people reacted to LSD. Bald-faced lie. And it's kind of unnerving that someone so high up in the government of the United States, as Admiral Turner was, would tell such a blatant lie right through his very teeth to the American Senate as to what MK Ultra was about. And see, this gentleman here, Mr. Marks, is saying it's not just about the CIA's experimentation with drugs. It's about electric shock techniques. It's about radiation techniques, and it's about radiological experiments on American test subjects. It's about ultrasonic experiments on human test subjects. It's about psychosurgery. It's about human psychology. It's about incapacitation. Okay, there are so many elements to this experimentation that the CIA was running on U.S. citizens during the time period corresponding from, I think it was 1953 to 1973. I mean, it was absolutely horrible, and the CIA did this thinking that no one would find out about it, just like people started practicing gangstalking thinking no one would find out about it. And gangstalking uses a lot of these same attack mechanisms on U.S. citizens. It uses radiological elements. It uses hidden weapons. It uses germ warfare. Okay, it uses radiation. Okay, it uses psychosurgery and psychological warfare tactics on U.S. citizens at the behest of their enemies, some of which they haven't seen in 5, 10, or 20 years. Like in my case, I got people that I haven't seen in this amount of time tapping into my Gangstalking campaign, watching the devastation as if it were a movie or something. And the U.S. federal government is using taxpayer dollars to make this nightmare a reality. Think of how bad this is going to make America look, and they don't care. As long as their target is harmed in some way, that's all they care about. Well, you're going to care about something else very soon. When this program gets made public, you're going to care about how this makes your country look. Not only here, but around the world. Okay? So yeah, contemplate that. Next time you bring somebody I haven't seen in 25 years to my location so that they can take a look at what I'm doing, so they can feel better about their lives or some perceived infraction, okay? Oh, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, you made the wrong enemy. That's why we got you in Gangstalking campaign. All right, fine. You're being exposed now, and we'll see how much damage this does to the image and reputation of the United States. My program is already being heard around the world. You got to stop sometime. And even if you refuse to apologize to me, which again, America is very prideful. Its government is very prideful. It will use some of these techniques on an American citizen and then when exposed, not apologize. They may never apologize, but that's okay. I don't need an apology. My reward is exposing you. I don't need you to apologize. So essentially what Mr. Marks, a man after my own heart, is saying, he's saying that Admiral Stansfield Turner is only giving you part of the puzzle, and he's not telling you the full scope of what MK Ultra is about. And apparently they're testing chemicals called bobocapenine, which is a drug that they call it a truth serum. All right, you inject somebody with it, and it causes them to go into a stupor beyond being inebriated. Okay, beyond that, and they're using it on monkeys and convicts that are incarcerated. And the agency wanted to know if the drug caused the loss of speech in man or the loss of sensitivity or the loss of willpower, and it did. I mean, this was probably the CIA probably used this chemical on women as a date rape drug to make them easier to sleep with. The CIA is not above using these products on women and children. A lot of these tests that they were using, they used them on men, women, and children, which you will see later on. And how about this bit right here about the CIA participating in a study on how to kill people without leaving a trace? Okay, why do you need to know how to kill U.S. citizens without leaving a trace? Is the criminal justice system not good enough? Okay, if a person is deemed a credible threat to society, can't you incarcerate them, try them in a court of law, and sentence them if found guilty, or let them go if found innocent? Why does the CIA need ways to kill people without leaving a trace? All right, is this power to the people or power to MK Ultra? Is this a country of the people, by the people, and for the people, as the founding documents say? Or is this a country that uses taxpayer resource to give the CIA and the greater federal establishment permission to perpetrate these human rights atrocities against their own citizens? I mean, put it together, ladies and gentlemen. We have a program called Gangstalking in place right now that uses a lot of these very same auspices, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to read the rest of this. In 1952, 2 Russian agents who were suspected of being doubled were interrogated using narco-hypnotic methods. Under medical cover, the document said the 2 men were given sodium pentothal and a stimulant. One interrogation produced a remarkable regression. The paper said during which the subject actually relived certain past activities of his life, some dating back 15 years, while in addition the subject totally accepted blank as an old and trusted and personal friend whom the subject had known for years past in the Georgian USSR. A summary of a 1953 meeting reported a suggestion that the CIA work with scientists of an unidentified foreign government, since that country allowed experiments with anthrax, which is a disease contracted from infected cattle and sheep, and the United States did not. If you remember, ladies and gentlemen, anthrax was the chemical that was being used post 9/11 against U.S. Congress people. People were sending Congress people letters that had anthrax inside the letters. So when the congressional aides were going through the congressperson's mail, they take a letter opener, open the mail, open the letter, and anthrax in powder form would fill the room, right? In an attempt to get whoever was in the room terminally ill. See, we're talking about anthrax all the way back from 1953 right now. So 60 years later, post 9/11, this chemical anthrax is still being used against U.S. Congress people. Just think of that for a second. Anthrax was first developed in 1953. Then in 2002, it was being thrown at U.S. Congress people in letters. Think about that. 60 years later, anthrax is still around. It was developed by the CIA. It was probably the CIA that was putting them in letters and throwing them and throwing these pieces of mail at congressional leaders, ladies and gentlemen. The documents given to Mr. Mark were heavily edited or redacted, probably for security reasons, but showed even that while the CIA was operating this program, it was conscious of its questionable nature. One 1950s memorandum on finding psychiatrists to conduct experiments noted that one applicant's ethics might be that he might not care to cooperate in certain more revolutionary phases of our project. We're going to scroll down a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. According to Mr. Marx's documents in an earlier Senate investigation, the CIA conducted secret medical experiments from 1949 through 63 under the code names Bluebird, Artichoke, MK Ultra, and MK Delta. The CIA Inspector General report in 1963 described the program as the research and development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior. I'm going to stop there before we get into the final part. So essentially what the CIA was doing was basically what it's doing now alongside the Department of Defense in this gangstalking thing. It is, I guess every generation needs its human experimenters, right? Every generation has its human experimenters. All right. You had in the 1960s, you had COINTELPRO, you had MK Ultra in the 60s and 70s. All right, you had elements of this program still in effect in the 80s and 90s. And now you got gangstalking in the 2000s and 2010s and 2020s. But see, they plotted gangstalking in such a way so that it wouldn't run into the same problems that MK Ultra ran into. You notice how the news media hasn't done much investigating on gangstalking? Notice how there haven't been any congressional meetings on it, no Senate hearings on it. Okay, notice how there are no newspapers that are carrying stories about this. That was pre-planned. Okay, the Department of Defense did not want this program to get exposed the way MK Ultra got exposed. You see all the damage it did to the CIA's image and reputation? You see how much damage it did to the Department of Defense? You see how much damage it did to the image of the United States? When gangstalking was implemented, they didn't want that same problem. So they have found a way to restrict national conversations on it. Okay? Now, mind you, ladies and gentlemen, the last presidential election was between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I consider both of these men to be decent men who genuinely love America. But there wasn't a single back and forth about gangstalking or its merits in that entire campaign. And that's by design. The architects of gangstalking did not want that problem. The architects of gangstalking didn't want this program to run into the same difficulties that MK Ultra ran into, but it's inevitable at this point. It's been exposed, ladies and gentlemen. And it should just send sort of a signal to the U.S. federal establishment in general that, yeah, okay, fine. All right? You want advanced knowledge on human behavior. Okay. Maybe find a way to do that doesn't involve clandestine spying operations, that involve biological attacks, okay, directed energy attacks, personal and professional subversion of your test subjects. Maybe try and find out about human behavior in a little more of a more constitutionally correct way. Maybe stop doing it like this, because it keeps getting exposed and it's going to make the country look bad. What do you think I'm going to do? Not talk about this? So, we're going to move on to the final part of this document. It's called 5,000 New Documents. Last week, Admiral Turner announced that the agency had discovered some 50,000 documents pertaining to the program that were not available to the Senate Intelligence Committee in 1975. They are financial records of the various experiments and include the names of doctors and medical institutions that performed the tests. Today, Admiral Turner gave the members a closed-door briefing on the new material. He will appear before a joint public hearing of the Intelligence Committee and Senator Edward M. Kennedy Health Subcommittee on July 29, 1977, to more fully describe the new findings. The Intelligence Committee staff will begin studying the documents later this week. Under the Freedom of Information Act, private citizens can obtain heretofore secret government documents provided they do not endanger current national security matters or disclose matters that could invade the privacy of other individuals. Legal pressure to dislodge the material he had received. So what we're seeing is that 5,000 new documents on MK Ultra have been declassified, or will be declassified, and they're mostly financial records of the various experiments. Like I said, these experiments cost money to run, and it was the taxpayer that was paying for them. And whether these experiments were being done at hospitals or colleges or just out in the open with any unsuspecting citizen, they cost money to run. Okay, I've oftentimes asked myself, it just psychologically, just internal conversations with myself concerning, we'll call them reflections and ponderances on clandestine gangstalking that I've had. I wonder what this program costs. It's got to cost at least $10 billion a year to run gangstalking, ladies and gentlemen. You're paying for that out of your pockets. Thank you. So we're going to move to the next article. We're back, ladies and gentlemen, with the CIA experimenting on children. This is from the New York Times, dated October 7th of 1977. Circumcision tests in 1961 disclosed in CIA data. This is out of Washington, Reuters. This article was apparently outsourced from Reuters to the New York Times from a September 30th article. The Central Intelligence Agency conducted experiments 16 years ago on circumcised boys to determine whether the operation left any emotional after effects. According to secret documents released Friday by the agency, the aim was to determine whether circumcision at a significant stage of a boy's development produced anxiety such as fear of castration, according to the heavily censored documents. The inability to resolve castration complex is linked with later emotional disorders, notably homosexuality, said one CIA research paper that discussed the experiments. In 1961, the documents show the agency approved a series of tests on 15 boys between the ages of 5 and 7 from low-income families. The National Health Service chose the boys from a culture whose identity was deleted from the documents, which are latest in a series released by the CIA in response to a request under the Freedom of Information Act. And I'll stop there for a second. The Freedom of Information Act is also known as a FOIA. If a U.S. citizen or a company or even a governmental auxiliary desires information about a government program or a sequence of events involving government activities, you can go to a number of governmental auxiliaries. You can go to the Department of Defense, you can go to the Department of Justice, you can go to the FCC, you can go to the Federal Trade Commission, you can go to federal, state, or local government auxiliaries and do a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, and find out if anything has been, if there's any data that is pertinent to the topic you want to know more about. So let's say I wanted to know more about MK Ultra, which I think just about every document you could possibly read on MK Ultra is flying around in the air, particularly on the internet. And you can find this information on the internet with a bit of diligence. And you can find pretty much all the information on MK Ultra that exists, even though back in the 60s, Dr. Sidney Godaleb, who at the time was the chief doctor in charge of the medical side of things for MK Ultra, he tried to destroy all the documents he could find on MK Ultra. He didn't want any of it to get out, but thousands upon thousands of pages of documents have been made public. But let's say for as a hypothetical, let's say I wanted to learn more about MK Ultra or try to locate new documents that were not already available for public viewing. I could write the CIA and do a FOIA request and ask about documents pertinent to MK Ultra. And if the CIA, after a 30-day period of looking for documents, if they found any new ones, they'd mail them to me. But if they didn't find any new ones, they'd write me a letter saying we could not find any documents pertinent to your request. So a FOIA, or a Freedom of Information Act request, is basically a way of asking a government auxiliary for more information about series of events concerning government programs or activities. So if, for example, I did a FOIA request to the FBI about gangstalking 2 or 3 years ago, just asking if there were any federally kept documents or any FBI documents about gangstalking that it had access to, that it was willing to furnish to me. And I got a letter back about a month later from the FBI saying that we got your request, your FOIA, your Freedom of Information Act request concerning materials about gang stalking, and at the present time, the FBI is not the custodian of any such record, and we have no documents that are pertinent to your request on gang stalking. And thank you for your inquiry. I've been through that process. It's actually a very exhilarating process. I encourage all U.S. citizens to do and even foreign nationals, people from other countries, if you want to know about government programs that have been going on here in the United States, do a FOIA request. The Church of Scientology has done thousands of FOIA requests on numerous government programs over the years, and sometimes the government agency that they do the request for has documents that are pertinent to their request, and sometimes they don't. The rest of this article reads: the documents chronicle a massive program code named MK Ultra, conducted in the 50s and 60s to control human behavior through the use of primarily mind-altering drugs. That is not accurate. MK Ultra was not primarily about subjecting people to mind-altering drugs. It was about human behavior experimentation using radiological weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, and disruption, harassment, and electroshock weapons against United States citizens. And Admiral Stansfield Turner, the director of Central Intelligence, said that the agency no longer conducted such experiments and had taken steps to ensure that such tests would never be conducted again. So that's according to Admiral Turner. But this is a truly shocking article, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, the CIA conducted experiments on poor boys aged 5 to 7 and circumcised them to see if it caused any type of anxiety about getting their genitals chopped off later in life, or if it caused a change in their sexual orientation. And you'll notice that these boys were chosen from poor families. Okay, that's because poor families are more likely to let their children be experimented on in such a way. Okay, these were probably impoverished households that were carrying out these experiments on these children. It doesn't say whether or not the CIA paid the families involved. Let us experiment on your children for a few days, Mr. and Mrs. Doe. This is the CIA. We're doing an experiment on whether or not circumcision in boys aged 5 to 7 leads to deviant behaviors later in life. We just want to know, can we experiment on your 5 to 7 year old sons with circumcisions, and we'll pay you approximately $5,000. Just let us experiment on your kids for a few days. We'll pay you $5,000, right? That's probably what happened. It doesn't get into it, but there had to have been some sort of a payment made. I mean, you can't just knock on somebody's door and say, "Hey, how you doing? I'm a CIA agent. I saw your little boys walking home from school today. They looked about the age range that we need for an experiment that we're conducting." The experiment involves the removal of foreskins of little boys. We don't know if you've circumcised your sons or not, but if they're not circumcised, we would like to take them to a nearby hospital and circumcise them for a project we're doing to see what happens to them later in life psychologically. Are you okay with this? We'll pay you for your time. Okay, I don't see that scenario happening. I think it was much more covert. It was probably the CIA used a front person maybe some sort of a test, some sort of a local clinic to possibly go from door to door in impoverished areas, knocking on doors saying, we've discovered that there are new health risks involved with boys aged 5 to 7 having foreskins. We would like to offer to remove your son's foreskins for free if you sign this waiver here. There are health benefits. And this is a communication by the National Institute of Health, right? It would probably go more like that. You see, it would probably be done under the auspices of community health guidelines. And then they would monitor the boy's deviant behavior as it increased over the years. In various psychological experiments involving the boys' communities. So yeah, I mean, this is something that actually happened here in this country, and it really is quite strange. So we're gonna read from this unclassified document that is from a magazine called the Daily Snap. The date on this document is October 18th, 1991. And you'll notice, ladies and gentlemen, that there is a bit of information before the extract about a nuclear power plant in Russia. That is not a part of this. That is not a part of this. Of the MK Ultra portion. That is a totally different part of a different article in this particular newspaper. The part we're going to be reading starts at the extract, although it's a fairly interesting article that precedes the extract. It's about concerns about a submarine cleaning, a submarine maintenance plant in Shkotovo, Russia. And apparently this submarine maintenance plant was right next to a nuclear power plant, and there were citizens of this particular territory in Russia that were concerned about radioactivity that could reach their homes from the nuclear power plant. And just basically it talks about how the local officials think that a sanitization of the area needs to take place, and now, because radiation actually can reach communities from power plants, not so much the submarine maintenance facility, but the power plant that's right near it. Caused concern in some of the locals with respect to the radiation that they thought was emanating from the power plant to their homes. So that was something that was examined by Russian authorities, and from what I understand, that matter was successfully remedied by the Russian authorities during that particular time frame. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I read, I would like to let you know something that, again, it's a situation where the United States, right? I mean, and mind you, this is just a concern that I'm going to get off my chest before we get into the extract of this new article. The United States typically, its federal government, all right, despite the thousands upon thousands of human rights documents that are on the books, despite the thousands upon thousands of civil rights laws that are on the books, despite the founding documents of this country talking about the life, liberty, and happiness of all, okay, despite this country presenting itself to the world as a Christian nation, all right, despite this country's adamance at its amazing record on human rights and its amazing record on democracy and its amazing record on freedom, okay, typically all they'll point to is we've had hundreds of thousands, if not millions of soldiers die in battle so that Americans can have rights. Okay, that's sort of their go-to blanket. Okay, that's their shield. Okay, those in the American establishment that appear to not have much of a problem with programs like COINTELPRO or MK Ultra or Gangstalking or any of the programs that yielded human rights abuses in order to accomplish an objective. They'll say, no, don't complain about that. You're doing all the soldiers that have died on duty for this country a disservice by complaining. Don't complain at all. You're doing those dead soldiers a disservice. Again, ladies and gentlemen, my comeback to that is those same soldiers that you hide behind to deflect criticism for your thuggish human rights abuses are turning in their grave that they lost their lives to protect the kinds of thuggery that the U.S. federal establishment is perpetrating right this very second. You put those soldiers' families in an awkward position because now you have to explain to them why their loved one's sacrifice on the battlefield to preserve freedoms is being systematically disrespected by both the Departments of Defense and Justice using disgusting programs like clandestine gangstalking as a human behavior experimentation protocol. Is that what those young men and women perished for? Is so that their government could have the freedom to get its citizens sick or to harm its citizens with programs like clandestine gangstalking? Is that what those soldiers lost their lives for? Is so that their government could perpetrate this trash against its own citizens? Is that what they lost their lives for? So the U.S. federal establishment could, behind closed doors, authorize programs like clandestine gangstalking or even MK Ultra, which systematically disrupt, destroy, and harm U.S. citizens? I don't think that was their idea of freedom when they went into battle. I think they saw a freer America. I think they saw a safer America. I think they saw a safer world. I don't think they envisioned thuggery like clandestine gangstalking or MK Ultra manifesting after their sacrifice. I think they'd be disgusted if they looked at America in the 1970s or even now and saw the socio-political garbage that is manifested in the wake of their demise for American freedoms. And that's the comeback that I use for those types of people who say, hey, don't criticize America. You're doing these deceased soldiers a disservice. No, you're doing the deceased soldiers a disservice by polluting the country that they fought for with these disease spreading mechanisms and these disruption protocols called clandestine gangstalking. And the kinds of people you got doing gangstalking are a bunch of Weasley cowards at that. A lot of them take signals to a targeted person's location commit some act of thuggery or intimidation, and then scurry off. Okay, are you telling me that these soldiers that you say you revere so much lost their very lives, their very mortal lives, their natural lives, so that you could perpetrate these crimes against other U.S. citizens? I doubt that. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into the abstract. It would be tempting to turn psychological weapons against one's own people. Does that sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? Psychological weapons against one's own people? Yeah, that was done in MK Ultra, and yeah, it's being done right now in clandestine gangstalking. And make millions of them forget about discontent with the system of social inequality, about the struggle for peace, and about their civil rights. Oppressed but joyful, fleeced by monopolies but content with everything. Wouldn't this be the ideal citizen from the point of view of the ruling circles in countries of the West? I'm going to stop there for a second. That is a profound statement. It's saying that it would be tempting for a government to use psychological weapons against its own citizens so as to keep them easier to control. And it's asking a very important and very powerful rhetorical questions. Wouldn't any government want a citizenry that is oppressed but joyful at their oppression? Robbed blind by monopolies but content with their poverty? Wouldn't this be the ideal citizen for any government? That's what's being asked here. Wouldn't any government or anyone in a seat of power like it if their populaces were easy to control, were easy to take advantage of, were easy to destroy with no resistance whatsoever? That's what the United States is going for right now with its own people. Clandestine gangstalking, ladies and gentlemen. And no, I don't apologize for coming forward about this disgusting program. This is a human rights atrocity we're talking about here. And quite frankly, I think that the orchestrators of the program are just as disgusting as the people that participate in it. And quite frankly, it makes me want to move somewhere where, you know, the American national security influence is nil, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, again, I've attempted to do my part. I've attempted to be a good citizen. Okay, pay my taxes, do civilian patrol assignments. I studied pre-law for a while, took political science classes so I could be more in tune with my government and how it works and what makes it function. All right, at the college level, okay, attempting to put myself in a position to work in the American courts in various capacities to ensure that the judicial process is properly implemented in this country. All right, so many things I've attempted to do, so many things that I've done in my 40 years on this earth to further the interest of my country. I'm a registered voter. I'm active in the political process. I've done poll work for Miami-Dade County. But keep something in mind. When you're in a gang stalking campaign, none of that matters. All right, your gang stalker's aim, its cause, its function is to destroy its target at a profit. And with a profit. Okay, I'm expendable, ladies and gentlemen. And no, the CIA, I don't expect it to write me a letter of apology anytime soon because it thinks I'm being too harsh with my language, obviously. But we're going to continue reading, ladies and gentlemen. Stories about design bureaus, which instruments have been developed for producing long-distance effects on the human mind, have begun to appear in the press. Among the mail that we receive from our readers have been a trickle of letters which mention individual brainwashing by mysterious psychological weapons. Vladimir Nikitovich Volchenko is a professor of the Moscow State Technical University Emini Bauman, and Deputy Chairman of the USSR Union of Scientific and Engineering Societies Committee on Bioenergy Information Processing, which in the Russian vernacular is pronounced Bioenergo Informatika. He took part in preparing materials on the question of protecting citizens against psychological terror for the RSFSR Supreme Soviet. And I would like to stop there before we continue, ladies and gentlemen. So they're talking about this professor, Vladimir Volchenko, who's a professor of the Moscow State Technical University. And he's the deputy chairman of the USSR Union of Scientific and Engineering Society. And he took part in preparing materials on the question of protecting citizens against psychological terror. Now, I'd like to break that down just for a second. So it says that he worked for the RSFSR. I think it's important to know what the RSFSR is. It is the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. And essentially it is within the USSR. It's Russia proper. Okay, it's the country of Russia. Okay, within the USSR. Because keep in mind, while the USSR was a sovereign territorial entity, it had it was essentially the overseer and the administrative director of 15 Soviet republics in addition to Russia, 14 Soviet republics in addition to Russia. Okay, in addition to Russia, you had Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Okay, so these were the autonomous regions the former autonomous regions that Russia gained control of through conquest. Russia was the Roman Empire of the East of those times. It was a conquering empire, and the RSFSR was the name for the actual country Russia, and not necessarily the entire USSR, which included Russia and the countries that I just named. So this guy had, that we're talking about here, this Vladimir Volchenko, he was basically a very high-ranking data scientist and an engineer professor for the Russian Supreme Soviet, which was essentially the supreme governing body of Russia proper, which could be seen in many respects as you could compare it in a way to the U.S. Congress in its legislative duties. So he was doing research for the Supreme Soviet of Russia proper, on protecting Russian citizens against psychological terror. So I mean, it would be nice if we had such a scientist. I mean, I'm that guy here. I mean, I do here in the U.S. what Vladimir Nikiforovich Volchenko did in Russia. I do what he did here. I supply information to U.S. citizens on how to protect yourself against psychological terror. I help you do that with the EIS Media Group lecture series. So it says for such cases to become fewer, people must first be rescued from psychological terror, which is now occurring. The term psychological terror refers to factors which adversely affect human consciousness. Politics and ideology are not the only ones which should be mentioned. Among the rest are hypnosis, shows at stadiums and on television. After the trailblazer, the psychotherapist A. Kasparovsky, came hundreds of his followers who have been giving similar performances. The trouble is not even that many of these therapists are elementary acquisitors who are out to make easy money in a hurry. This is a topic for separate conversations. The danger lies elsewhere. Mass sessions of this kind have a substantial impact on the hypnotizability of millions of televiewers. The sessions heighten it, and this means that the viewers stand a greater chance of being turned into zombies. The runaway UFO psychosis spawned by television is another example. From letters and in a course of personal conversations, my colleagues on the Bioenergoinformatica Committee, that I have established numerous cases of psychosis on topics of contacts with unidentified flying objects. This is dangerous. Is there a way of preventing mass creation of zombies? Of course, and it is known to the whole world. It consists primarily in accepting a new thinking model which involves human spirituality. It must never be forgotten that for humanity, the optimal order of tasks which are accomplished proceeds from morality to ecology to economics and politics. In our country, it is just the other way around at present. You have politics, economics, ecology, and morality. Do you think that we can enter the future with the cart before the horse? And this is a letter from, well, we'll stop there. So Vladimir Volchenko is basically talking about projects that appear aimed at mass hypnosis through images and subliminal messages, etc., etc. There's a lot of that going on in the United States now, particularly in video games. I mean, if video games aren't like they were in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s, where they were based on skill, strategy, hand-eye coordination, okay, adaptability, perseverance. Over the past 50 years, there have been countless video games that have required these kinds of skills in order to beat the video game. And the video games were designed brilliantly by video game designers that knew art, that knew graphic design, that knew essentially just the creation of whole new worlds right there on a video game motherboard. And these video games have made hundreds of billions in revenues for various video game publisher companies. And I think that, you know, a lot of these video games contributed to sort of the fast and loose culture that baby boomers, millennials, and Generation Xers were subjected to in their young lives between the ages of 18 and 34. But nowadays, games are more aimed at video games of these times are more aimed at changing the way young people think of the world around them, as opposed to presenting a challenge for the video game player. I mean, it's just basically, you got video games that are getting memos from the national security apparatus in this country saying, hey, before you release this game to the general public, we want to review it and make sure that you're not advocating terrorism or something. You know, we want to make sure that this game is a family-friendly game, and we want to make sure that this game, whoever plays this video game, loves their country more after playing it. So we're going to review this video game, and we're going to tell you whether or not it's acceptable for the American people. And oftentimes these games are submitted to national security actors for review. And the national security actors review these video games and they say, hey, wait just a minute. Okay, this video game has a lot of ninja action, and there's a lot of nunchucks and sword swinging, and there's a lot of ninja stars throwing, and you guys got some rifles in this game. You know, we don't know if this game is appropriate for the young people of today's world. We want to put something in there to soften the game up, to make it more easy to digest. We want you to add some elements in this game that make it softer and more friendlier to children and to their parents who don't want children who are addicted to violent video games living in their house. You know, we want to make this game softer. We want to make it gentler. We want to make it friendlier. We want to make it easier. And we want to make it more palatable to the American public. And if you don't make these changes to this video game, and you're going to put some brainwashing elements in it so that the children will be brainwashed into loving one another, into loving this country, and into loving Jesus Christ too. You're going to put some subliminal messages of Jesus in this game too. Otherwise, we're going to restrict you from releasing it under the revised code of the United States. So yeah, I mean, there's a general gist in this man's research that entertainment is used to implement, or rather cause, essentially what you might describe as imposed psychosis on people. I mean, you're going to use mediums like television, like movies, like video games, like you name it, to brainwash the masses. And he's talking some here about UFOs, which, I mean, you got people around the world saying in various mediums, some do it, talk shows, magazines, movies, articles, you name it, that they were abducted by aliens and UFOs, and the aliens, conducted experiments on them and sent them back to Earth. I mean, do I believe that? No. Ladies and gentlemen, do I believe in intelligent life beyond Earth? Yes. But do I believe that these intelligent life forms come to Earth in UFOs and abduct people? No. No. I mean, how could a person miss that? Right? How could anybody miss a flying saucer coming down into Earth's atmosphere, abducting somebody, flying off, doing experiments on that person, then coming back into Earth's atmosphere, and then dropping that person back off where they picked them up at? How could we miss that? Right? Don't we have satellites and all kinds of military industrial technology that's aimed at finding these types of phenomena? All right. The only way that could possibly happen to a person is if intelligent life beyond Earth found a way to build flying saucers and spaceships and aircrafts, make them invisible. Okay. And then to start abducting people. Okay, that's possible. But you got people saying that they were abducted by aircrafts that were visible. I mean, there's no way. How could anybody else miss that? You say you were abducted, but how is it your neighbors didn't see that happen? How is it nobody saw it happen? The U.S. military, the Department of Justice, the local police, the local fire departments, everybody just happened to miss that. This spacecraft coming into Earth's atmosphere and abducting you in your driveway and flying off with you? No, that's impossible to miss. But if these extraterrestrials or these intelligent beings beyond Earth have mastered the art of invisibility, well, Invisibility is possible from a technological standpoint. Is it possible that they're using invisible flying objects to enter Earth's atmosphere? Yes, that is visible. That is possible, ladies and gentlemen. The Bible itself talks about the Ezekiel's wheel, which is the object that was used to illustrate the power of the empires of the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. And Ezekiel's wheel is the standard for extraterrestrial or aerial spacecraft activity in the Holy Bible. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, these aircrafts are highly technical according to the prophets, if you believe what the prophets say are true. We're gonna scroll down. From the editor, specialists have acknowledged that psychological weapons exist, and information media, which have long been a tool for ideological brainwashing of the masses, are probably one of the most potent varieties of such weapons. But information about the existence also of technical psi weapons has been confirmed at the same time. The editors have received a report about a discovery and an invention called a method of inducing artificial sleep at a distance by means of radio waves. To the best of our knowledge, a hypnotic radiator has been built and is successfully tested in a military unit. So what he's talking about is psychotronic weapons and psychotronic gadgets and devices. These are in existence, ladies and gentlemen. Just simply Google it. I mean, look up stemreceivers. All right, look up spectrum-based weapons technology. Look up directed energy weapons. Look up these things. I mean, they're in existence, and people are using them on people at a distance, behind closed doors, or out of sight, so you can't see who the perpetrator is. I mean, imagine some Weasley coward scurrying around your neighborhood in a car or behind some wall somewhere in an office building, bathing your neighborhood or bathing your household in directed energy weapons, essentially causing harm to you or your family, physical or psychological harm, and you don't know who the perpetrator is. But there are devices and gadgets out there to where you can actually see these spectrums coming at you from a distance, and you're able to identify the direction that they're coming from, and you could possibly identify the perp with these various spectrum or radiological identification gadgets. And then there's an obituary of a Rear Admiral Ronald Alexandrovich Anokin, which is not exactly a part of the article that we're reading from, but sounds like a swell guy, highly accomplished. Apparently a Russian man who at one point commanded a motor torpedo boat. And he's been awarded many honors and medals of the USSR, with the obituary having been submitted by a group of his comrades. So interesting article all the way around. This data scientist, Vladimir Volchenko, is examining induced psychosis and invisible psychological gadgets, devices, and weapons that are being used on the masses to brainwash them and make them easier to control by their governments. All right, we're going to move on to the next article. All right, the next article is the CIA. The CIA envisioned Soviet scientists as U.S. agents. This is an article by Patrick Auster. It's dated September 11th, 1977. It is a a Chicago Sun-Times article. The Central Intelligence Agency secretly financed a research project at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in order to gain new data on how to turn Russian scientists into CIA agents. As a part of its Project MKUltra, the CIA, using a private foundation as a front, spent a total of $12,000 in 1958 and 1959 on determining what criteria can be developed in spotting and assessing Soviet scientists as potential agent recruits. According to CIA memos obtained by the Chicago Sun-Times, the research was conducted by Anthony J. Weiner, who at the time was affiliated with Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Center for International Studies, which was set up in 1951 with Central Intelligence Agency money, and had its first director, Max F. Millikan, a former assistant director of the agency. Weiner, currently a consultant with the Hudson Institute think tank in New York, was apparently an unwitting pawn in the CIA's mind control project. The research, which relied heavily on interviews with American and Western scientists returning from the Soviet Union, was financed by the now defunct Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology, a New York-based CIA front set up in the 50s to provide a legitimate cover for CIA research projects, including some involving brainwashing. In a CIA memo dated September 17, 1958, an agency official outlined the real purpose of Weiner's research, given a model or prototype of a scientist that is desired that guidance be provided as regards the most effective way or ways in which repressed and rationalized anti-regime motivations may be aroused or more properly reactivated. The purpose of the above projects, the memo said, would be to sharpen our sights and methods as respects the spotting, development, and recruitment of selected types of citizens. So apparently, the CIA wanted to do some research, or rather a project, to ascertain whether or not it could recruit Russian scientists into the CIA. Russian scientists during these times were developing these cutting-edge technologies and research modules on the human brain and human behavior and psychological weapons and various socio-political mechanisms. And furthermore, the CIA had lots of experience with Russian intelligence, and apparently the CIA was very impressed with these Russian agents, to the point where it wanted to recruit them into the CIA, which did not happen. And apparently there was a gentleman by the name of Anthony Weiner, who was a international, we'll call him a political scientist, who was used by the CIA to essentially conduct interviews with American and European scientists who had visited the Soviet Union and had returned, but they had been sent to the Soviet Union with a mission of finding out how readily Russian scientists would defect from the USSR and come to America and work for the CIA as scientists and data gatherers. But, I mean, as far as I can tell, that program didn't produce any results. And this Weiner guy sort of said that his goal was to find out whether or not some of these scientists had anti-regime motivations, meaning if some of these scientists, these Soviet Russian scientists, got into the profession to find ways to subvert the Soviet government, rather than to assist the Soviet government. And if they could find or locate some of these dissident scientists in the Soviet Union who were anti-regime, that they could bring them back to America and hire them to work for the CIA. And apparently these American and European actors who were sent to the Soviet Union to try and recruit scientists to bring back to the USA were trying to arouse anti-Russian sentiment in these scientists to try and see if they could get them to defect or show some anti-regime sentiment so that they could be more readily recruited into the CIA back in America. So we're going to go to the next page. This is a Washington Post article dated October 27th, 1985. This is Subproject 68. The case continues. And I'm going to paraphrase a lot of this. So you have the Secretary of State, George Shultz, is apparently he's doing quite a bit of work in Canada concerning a project that was carried out by the CIA against Canadian citizens called Subproject 68. The CIA funded gruesome psychological experience on Canadian citizens as a part of its MKUltra program of brainwashing and mind bending. So it looks like anywhere between 9 and 50 Canadians were unwittingly brainwashed by the CIA and had experiments conducted on them. And apparently there is a gentleman by the name of Joseph Rao, who is a veteran civil rights attorney that is suing the CIA on behalf of the Canadians who were experimented on. And apparently the CIA is dragging its feet, refusing to negotiate a settlement with these victims. The chief of Canada's Labour Party, Clark, I'm sorry, what's her name? I'm sorry, hold on. Okay, the Chief Clark of the Canadian Labour Party said, "I am not satisfied with the slow pace of discussions in district court, but this, of course, is beyond our control." Sean Brady, Clark's press secretary, told our associate Connie Capaccio, "We expect to be discussing this issue in some detail with Shultz at the Calgary, Alberta meeting." So, and then it talks about Subproject 68, which was a sub-project of MKUltra, which started in January of 1957, in which a $60,000 grant was given to a Dr. Ewan Cameron, who was a world-renowned psychiatrist, at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada. The CIA paid this man to conduct potentially harmful experiments on Canadian persons. But those experiments are not gone into in detail here. What's gone to in detail is Dr. Ewan Cameron's repugnant ideas of human experiments that were supposed to be conducted on Canadian citizens. What he proposed was that the CIA go over into Canada and through Dr. Cameron find a way to essentially torture Canadian citizens for 16 hours a day over a 7-day period, where prearranged verbal signals were used on patients who were kept in isolation that would cause electroshocks to this person. And furthermore, these test subjects were to be subjected to LSD while these electroshocks were happening. And this was an actual project that a CIA affiliated doctor was throwing around using on Canadian citizens. And apparently this project never came to fruition. Because of its absolute absurdity. So it also talks about Dr. Frank Olson, a civilian employee of the Army, who was subjected to he was a biological scientist who studied biological pathogens. And this Dr. Frank Olson was a civilian employee of the Army. He was an Army scientist that studied biological science. And he was experimented on by the CIA. He was while he wasn't looking, somebody involved in a study of LSD for the CIA put a dose of LSD in his glass of liquor, and he leapt off of a 10-story hotel window. He jumped out of a 10th floor. Jeez, I'm sorry. I'm going to get this out. He jumped out of a 10th floor hotel room window a few days later while seeking treatment for his psychological injuries sustained after having ingested the LSD. And he jumped out of this 10th floor window. That's 100 feet in the air. He jumped off of a 100-foot high window to his death from the psychological effects of having been snuck LSD in his liquor bottle by a CIA experimenter personnel. And apparently there was a guy by the name of Jittinger who testified in 1983 that he hadn't noticed the LSD proposal in Cameron's application. However, in any case, the CIA project monitor said it was not his job to raise questions about Cameron's testing methods. So the CIA was basically given blanket access to drugs and all kinds of products to make to make the MK Ultra product work. So this next article is going to be it's published by the Church of Scientology, who did hundreds, if not thousands, of FOIA requests in the 1970s concerning mind experiments that the U.S. federal government was conducting on people. This was a publication by the Church of Scientology, Bizarre CIA Human Mind Control Experiments. I'm going to read some of these quotes here. Over the years, the Central Intelligence Agency has benefited from the insights and contributions of psychiatry and the behavior sciences. That's from William Colby, the CIA director in 1973. It was fun, he says. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and the blessing of the All-Highest? Okay, that was a quote from a CIA employee circa 1971. We're going to paraphrase a lot of this. It talks about the atrocities perpetrated by the Third Reich, which is Nazi Germany. These same atrocities are now being committed by the CIA. I mean, it's and millions of dollars out of taxpayer paychecks are being used to finance these projects. We're going to move to the CIA deaths portion of this. It only took a few years before the first known deaths occurred at the hands of the CIA psychiatric drug experimenters. The record of willing subjects. Howard Blower's final minutes is cold and terse. Pre-narcosis, apprehensive, considerable persuasion required. Injection administered at 9:53. Post-narcosis, 9:59. Subject so restless he has to be restrained by a nurse. Out of contact with reality, arms flailing, sweating profusely. 10:01 a.m., rapid oscillation of eyeballs. 10:11, body rigid all over. 10:15, stimulant administered. 10:20 to 11:45, a deep coma. 11:50, artificial respiration administered. 12:15, doctor pronounces subject dead. 12:30, hospital authorities notified. 3:30 p.m., body transferred to a morgue. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we see here in this particular sequence of events is basically it's a CIA-sanctioned murder that happened on a man named Harold Blower. Apparently, he was strapped to a table in a hospital somewhere. He was probably given all kinds of narcotics and hallucinogenic drugs as an experiment. And when he started flailing and reacting to them and probably trying to get the heck out of that hospital, he was held down and stimulants were injected into this man's body, probably in an attempt to intentionally overdose him. And that's just what happened. Over the next couple of hours, he overdosed. And a couple of hours more, his body was sent to a morgue. Like I say, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of these CIA test subjects were expendable, and their lives meant absolutely nothing to the experimenters. We've talked about Frank Olson. I think this is important. Dr. James Cattell, when talking about Harold Blower, he had no foreknowledge of the substances that this man was being given while he was at the hospital. He said we didn't know whether it was dog piss or what it was that we were giving him. So for all they knew, they were injecting this test subject with dog urine to see how the dog urine caused this man to react physiologically. And we read about Frank Olson. He's a well-respected Army biologist who leapt to his demise after having been given a dose of LSD by CIA actors. This next article says that, talks about all the fun that these CIA actors had experimenting on U.S. citizens, and how people outside the CIA are unwitting as to how many people were murdered in this these experimental procedures. Sidney Gottlieb, we've read about him in the past. He was the guy that tried to destroy all the records that the CIA had generated concerning MKUltra, so no one would ever find out about it. The Scientologists compared MKUltra to programs that the Nazis ran and were eventually executed for after the Nuremberg trials concluded. Okay, there were chemical compounds that were being tested on people, biological compounds and diseases that were tested on people, mind control devices and procedures were tested on people. CIA agents in the 1950s were experimented with techniques that were codenamed artichoke. There were problems with some of the agents involved. There was the case of this 29-year-old college graduate who was the head of a small political party, an independent party. The CIA was interested in a rumor that a foreign intelligence service wanted to make this guy a double agent. So the CIA apparently hatched a plan to assassinate this young man. So apparently he was falsely arrested and taken into custody, and they apparently deemed him a nuisance, and apparently they eventually flew him to, they probably administered some sort of a chemical substance to this young man to make him lose his mind. And then they threw him in a psychiatric facility. They could have sent him to a friend, but chose not to. And apparently this young man's fate is unknown. Now, let me put this in the clearer context for you, ladies and gentlemen. So, this happened in 1952, apparently. Okay, there was a 29-year-old man who started a small political party. Okay? He was young, ambitious, bright. He was kind of a high and mighty type, but he was very much a political leader who commanded people's respect. Now, the CIA heard a rumor that there was a foreign intelligence service, right? We don't know who it was, but there was a foreign government that was interested in making this man a spy for them. So the CIA essentially abducted this man under false pretexts, threw him into prison, kept him detained, subjected him to psychiatric experiments, drove him crazy, threw him in a psychiatric facility, and no one knows what happened to this man afterwards. They probably killed him. Rather than send him home to a friend. So that happened here in the United States, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it's almost comical, ladies and gentlemen. It's almost cartoonish, some of the stuff that the CIA was doing to people in these times. But equally cartoonish is the kinds of things that are happening right here in the United States, just right now, here today, that are equally as comedic and confusing as what was done to this 29-year-old man. Now listen, if the CIA thought that what this guy's doing was politically subversive, you could take this man into questioning. You could use programs like COINTELPRO or something similar to disrupt his political party. If you thought that what he was doing was subversive politically, they could easily have disrupted this man and put what he was doing to rest. They didn't have to kidnap him and induce psychosis with psychiatric drugs, incarcerate him in a mental facility and kill him. What gives? What about this man's civil and constitutional rights that he had? You know? If there was a problem with his political activities or this political party that he started, There were ways to investigate it. They could have called him into an office or asked the FBI to do an interrogation of him if they thought what he was doing was subversive. But no, they wanted to yank him around and kill him. I mean, it really is disgusting. And apparently, there was the disposal of agents as well going on in the CIA during this time. In the 1950s, there were agents who were disposed of, quote, for their inability to complete missions. I mean, apparently the CIA had this ongoing fear of agents who were incompetent. All right, if there's an agent that's incompetent, you should kill him. That was their stance on that. Let's see. There were experiments with hypnosis done. And this is an interesting part of this. There was a CIA psychiatrist, Dr. Bernard Malloy. He was secretly employed by the CIA's Office of Medical Research. Apparently this guy, he was treating political figures at a private practice, and he was secretly employed by the CIA also. So he was probably giving these politicians psychiatric business to the CIA. I mean, listen, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, yeah, these are bizarre experiments, and ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, you know, you're gonna. I need anyone who looks at what I say with raised eyebrows to remember this. I experienced some of this myself. I would like to be able to do a video one day about how great America is and how free it is, and how it stepped up to the plate on this issue called clandestine gangstalking. I would love to do a video about the wonderful things that America has done philanthropically at home and abroad, and about some of the wonderful things that it does. But you have that's all you really hear, though, usually, right? Is about these things. I mean, you know, I realize there's a lot going on right now. You know, you don't have a lot of news media talking about this. We've had a situation in the Middle East in which the Shah of Iran was killed during a joint U.S. and Israeli operation. I'm not here to say that this operation is wrong or right, okay? The auspices of this operation has been fairly well hidden from the American public, and I'm not about to sit here and speculate as to why they thought that was a good move. But I'm going to say this, okay? The reasons that are given are typically parallel to the Iranian nuclear program or something to that effect, right? Iran is looked at skeptically by the U.S. and Israel because of its nuclear program. But as I've said in previous lectures, okay, when it comes to nuclear weapons, you need proliferation and you need diplomacy, in my estimation. There is not a single country on this planet that don't have nuclear weapons. Any Middle Eastern country, including Iran, may or may not develop nuclear weapons simply to have a way to protect itself in case of a nuclear attack. Okay? Now, I don't condone past Iranian heads of state saying things like, we want to exterminate or annihilate Americans, Israelis, or Europeans, any more than I would condone Americans or Israelis or Europeans saying we want to exterminate the Iranian population or the Arab population. I don't personally condone or politically condone extermination of people at all. Think of what that is. We saw some of that in World War II with Adolf Hitler. Okay? We saw how ugly that can get. Why do we want to relive that? We don't. But at the same time, if you have nuclear weapons, if you have a nuclear weapons arsenal, and your allies have nuclear weapons arsenals, and you're looking at this Middle Eastern country for possibly having a nuclear weapons arsenal, it would appear to me that the best way to resolve that conflict is through diplomacy. Now, I don't know if President Trump has met with Iranian leaders in his 2 terms in office, but I do know that President Trump has met with Kim Jong-un, the president of North Korea, in an attempt to solve a diplomatic puzzle that the U.S. has had with North Korea over the years. I also remember in a televised debate during President Trump's first run for office, where he said that he thought it would be a good idea to have good diplomatic ties with Russia. And he said it too. He said, I think it would be a good idea to be more friendly with Russia, right? So that's 2 countries, Russia and North Korea, that President Trump has publicly stated it probably wouldn't be a bad idea for the United States to have better relationships with these countries. I would like to have heard him say Iran as well, okay, and Cuba. I think better relationships with Iran and Cuba would be a good idea for the United States too. But what the United States executive offices are saying is that Iran and Cuba have adversarial attitudes towards the United States, and that if Iran is going to be making nuclear weapons and saying things like, well, I'm going to exterminate the Israelis, I mean, that is it's a cause of concern for Western governments. Okay, they are going to use that as a pretext to carry out operations like we saw. Now, in contrast to that, we saw what happened on October 7th of 2023, or 2024, if I'm not mistaken, when Hamas killed 1,500 Israelis in the streets of, I think it was Tel Aviv. That is what started the shock and awe attacks against the Palestinians by the Israelis. I mean, there's a pattern here that I think needs to be talked about, ladies and gentlemen. And I realize that this is a bit of a deviation from MK Ultra, but these types of matters need to be looked at. They need to be resolved, and they need to be resolved realistically. Okay? And ultimately, I think it's a start for Trump to say, you know what, we need to talk to North Korea. I think Trump visited North Korea. I think the first U.S. president to visit North Korea to try and establish diplomatic ties. And I think he's met with Vladimir Putin as well. And I think that a visit with the Iranian government from President Trump is a little more contentious and a little more sensitive because of the Iranian government's contentious relationship with Israel, who is a stalwart U.S. ally. So, speaking with Kim Jong-un, I think that's a plus. Speaking with President Putin, that's a plus. The next plus would be speaking with the leaders of Iran and trying to come to some sort of an agreement or diplomatic resolution, so that things like what we saw over the past week with the Shah's demise, situations like that are brought to a minimum. And the reason situations like that should be brought to a minimum is because, events like that could start world wars. And is that something we want? I mean, yeah, the U.S. has the advantage, all right, because, the U.S. is mighty, its European allies are mighty, Israel is mighty. They all have some of the most powerful weapons arsenals anywhere in the world. And they're very capable of keeping their respective homelands safe. But in under the banner of diplomacy that Trump himself talked about in his first run particularly, and having done these historic visits to North Korea and Russia, or rather meeting with Russian authorities, I think that the next step in bringing about a more peaceful Middle East would be talks with Iran and talks with Hamas, so that these things don't happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, in a very different vein, in a very different topic, we're going to talk about CIA hookers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have here a New Republic article dated September 3rd, 1977. This is an article that is, I don't know if this woman sold this information to the New Republic, or if she just did it out of a sense of just wanting to get this matter off of her chest. But the title of this article is called "I Was a Hooker for the CIA." It is by a person who has taken on the pen name Maggie Scarf. That's obviously not her real name. It's obviously I don't know, a pen name that this woman used to protect her identity. But it's an interesting enough article. I have a supplement article that I'm going to upload along with this, so you can get some more idea as to what these CIA brothels were about. We'll read, and as I go along, I'll decide here live if this is something that I want to read in its entirety or paraphrase. His name was Arp. I questioned him about the ethnicity of that name, but he would say nothing, even though I'd assured him that I had no prejudices of any kind. And to me, sex was strictly a business proposition. But he only smiled mysteriously, saying, "I'm not here for sex exactly." He'd stripped the sheets from my vast king-size bed, however, and remade the whole thing carefully using Boy Scout corners. There wasn't a wrinkle on the entire surface when he bid me into his arms. He was a future-oriented person, as I realized a moment later when the sexual act was completed. And now, he said brusquely, leaping from the bed, "I must set myself to rights again." I mean, so with this first paragraph, what you essentially have is you have a pretty woman type of situation going on here. You remember that movie that was real popular in the 1990s, Pretty Woman, starring Julia Roberts and Richard Gere? It was a very popular movie in the United States in the 1990s. It was about a high-dollar prostitute that some business guy used her services to make his life more leisurely. And he was paying this woman lots of money, like $1,500 a session. And eventually they fell in love with each other. and apparently he wanted to be this hooker's knight in shining armor. It's a very unlikely love story. I think that's what made it so interesting to the American public. And it apparently ended with the two of these people becoming lifelong romantic partners or something. I don't know if they got married or what happened, but it was an interesting movie. It won all kinds of awards. It was well produced and so forth. But we have here in this article, we have a guy that he's basically buying sex from this prostitute, and apparently this trick was a CIA agent. One second, ladies and gentlemen. And he asked this woman if she would be a prostitute for the CIA, conducting in conjunction with a project called MK Ultra, and it doesn't really say whether or not she took him up on this, but these prostitutes that these CIA agents were they were buying sex with them, and then they were turning around and asking them to join the CIA as hookers for MK Ultra. And I have some other articles that I want to go over with you as to what these prostitutes were asked to do. So essentially, they were. Just give me 1 second here. I found some interesting articles about what they were doing, actually. All right, so this MK Ultra project was called Operation Midnight Climax, a very pun-filled name. And the CIA employed prostitutes to lure unsuspecting men to CIA brothels, basically safe houses, where these prostitutes would drug these men with LSD, and these safe houses where these prostitutes were having sex with these guys for money, there were CIA agents hiding behind these mirrors that are called two-way mirrors that were apparently fastened to the wall of these safe houses where these prostitution encounters were occurring. And these CIA agents were hiding behind these mirrors and watching the sexual encounters unfold and observing how these clients, these Johns, were reacting to the LSD that these hookers were giving them. So it was basically, this project took place in San Francisco, Marin County, California, and in New York City. And it was called Operation Midnight Climax. And these CIA hookers were told to take these guys into these rooms. And CIA agents were watching the action from behind mirrors. Two-way mirrors, kind of like you see in interrogation rooms in detective stations, where there'll be a big mirror in the room, but behind the mirror there would be law enforcers listening to the interrogation. These CIA safe houses had similar two-way mirrors, and there were CIA agents behind the mirrors on the other side of the wall, watching the sexual encounter and observing how the LSD affected these tricks. So The next article is in this in a similar topic. It's the San Francisco Examiner, dated August 5th, 1977. It's written by Jim Wood. It's basically saying that a CIA, and I'll read this, it's not terribly long. The CIA operation in which private citizens were lured to San Francisco brothels and unwittingly drugged was denounced today by the director of the CIA. Admiral Stansfield Turner said that the brothel drug experiments ended some 12 years ago and that 0 such bordellos are being operated now. He's basically saying that these bordellos, which are whorehouses, a place where a person can go to have sex with prostitutes, to buy sex with hookers. It says that that the CIA director was against these projects and was not in favor of them. So that means that the director of the CIA, Admiral Turner, was not aware of all of the projects or all of the experiments that were happening under the MK Ultra banner. That's pretty much it. I mean, it wasn't a terribly elaborate project. I mean, yeah, LSD was being administered to guys buying sex from prostitutes, and the reaction to these tricks, reaction to the drug was being monitored by CIA agents or CIA scientists. All right, we're going to move along with this next article. Rutgers University received CIA funds to study Hungarian refugees. This is another one I'm going to paraphrase. It's fairly cut and dry. The CIA basically did psychological experiments on Hungarian refugees that were fleeing Hungary. This is a Washington Post article by a writer by the name of John Jacobs. It's dated September 1st, 1977. Apparently, Rutgers University, which is based in Brunswick, New Jersey, basically was one of the 86 collegiate institutions that, or not collegiate, but one of the 86 institutions that knowingly or unknowingly were selected by the CIA to perform MK Ultra experiments. Apparently, approximately 50 Hungarian refugees who had fled Hungary during the Hungarian uprising, which was a political scenario where the Hungarian people rose up against the Hungarian government, which at the time was controlled by the USSR. They didn't like the conditions that the Hungarian people were subjected to by the puppet rulers of the Soviet Russian state. And there was an uprising in which thousands of Hungarians were killed by the Hungarian government and hundreds more were imprisoned. And there were many, many thousands of Hungarians that fled Hungary during this uprising and fled to other countries in Europe and outside of Europe. And apparently a number of these refugees found their way to the United States. And these Hungarian refugees were questioned. Their psychological state was examined. There was an intensive study on these people's attitudes towards the communist system that prevailed in Hungary at the time. And it seems like a political study, but given the auspices of much of the MK Ultra project, I wouldn't be surprised if these Hungarian refugees were subjected to drugs and hallucinogenic agents to see what the effect these drugs would have on foreign refugees as opposed to anyone else. That's my that's what I believe was happening here. I think that these Hungarians were subjected to chemical experiments. This sub-project had a budget of about $90,000, which in today's money would probably be closer to about $400,000. There was a researcher named Stevenson who said that he was not particularly disturbed that the CIA would be interested in Hungarian refugees. But he did want to know that the CIA was behind this. The public relations people at Rutgers wanted to know if the CIA was behind this study on Hungarian refugees and what exactly these Hungarian refugees were exposed to with respect to what was happening. But on its face, it looks like it was a political experiment aimed at seeing what their attitudes were towards communism, etc., etc. But like I say, this is an MK Ultra project. The goal was psychological experiments using psychiatric means, and I believe that these refugees were probably exposed to chemical or other psychosis-inducing agents, along with the various experiments that were being conducted. So this next article is the Washington Post. It's dated August 28th, 1982. It's by Jack Anderson. A lawsuit forces CIA confession on MK Ultra. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to the rather than read it word for word. We're going to look at some of the main talking points here. The CIA confessions were extracted in writing by an Atlanta, Georgia attorney named Thomas E. Maddox Jr., who represented a number of prisoners who were subjected to MK Ultra experiments while incarcerated. These 4 prisoners are seeking $500,000 apiece in damages from the federal government. Because these prisoners are saying that they were subjected to drugs. One of the prisoners attempted suicide, trying to burn himself alive, and he tried to hang himself, and he also tried to bite one of his own arms off. Because of these CIA experiments, there was a second victim named Don Roderick Scott who said that he suffered permanent brain damage from the tests. There was a third named John R. Mayol. Apparently he's a fugitive, so I don't know if that means he escaped or what have you, but the fourth name was named James T. Knight, and he is still in prison. So I guess 3 of the 4 are out of prison seeking damages for these MK Ultra experiments that were done to them in prison, particularly by the administering of illicit drugs. And the 4th subject was still incarcerated at the time of this article. And they're all saying that they suffered flashbacks and other severe symptoms for years after they were drugged by the CIA. And here are some of the shocking admissions made by the Justice Department under questioning by the victims' attorneys. MK Ultra's purpose was to research and develop chemical, biological, and radiological materials for use in clandestine operations to control human behavior. So, I mean, that's gangstalking in a nutshell right there. And also it says the CIA hoped that the psychoactive chemicals would work on the victim's minds and emotions to release him from the restraint of self-control, meaning that these drugs were administered with the purpose of causing these men to go off the rails and essentially go crazy. It was intended to develop anti-interrogation drugs to counter Soviet truth serums. So basically drugs that were made to, drugs that if you were a spy for the United States and you were spying on the Russians in Russia and you were captured by the Russians, what they're saying is that if the Russians gave you a truth serum, the CIA was experimenting with a drug that you could take to neutralize the effects of the truth serum so that you would not tell your captors anything about your mission. Basically, there was a successor program to MK Ultra called MK Search. And by the way, the MK in front of all of these projects is supposedly a reference to the technological division of the CIA, the Technological Services Division. Although I'm not exactly sure how MK translates to technological services, but that is what the MK in MK Ultra is a reference to. So there's a successor program called MK Search, which was terminated because the drugs and other techniques were too unpredictable in their effect on human beings. And there was another chemical program called MK Burn, which went from, 1950 to 1970. One of its researchers was Dr. Carl Pfeiffer, who also worked on MK Ultra. Pfeiffer has sworn that he was merely trying to find a cure for mental illnesses, and that's what he told the Atlanta convicts. So these Atlanta convicts were told in prison that they were going to be subjected to mind-altering drugs that were supposed to cure mental illness, but in fact they were psychoactive drugs and narcotics and other chemicals that were being tested on human beings, and it damaged these men. It damaged their psychological state permanently, and they went and found an attorney, and they're suing the U.S. federal government for $500,000 apiece. So the materials developed and tested were hallucinogenic, meaning LSD, mescaline, truth serum, powerful amphetamines. The CIA did not give them consent forms, and no follow-ups were made to see how these test subjects were doing. And there were not even doctors on hand the night the convicts were drugged to tend to their injuries. Some of the prisoners were so jacked up on dope that they were given during these experiments that they had to take more drugs just to get to sleep. 2 victims were transferred to a medical facility because of mental hallucinations, but the CIA says that this was not because of an adverse reaction to its drugs, which were intended to duplicate psychosis. So expenses records were kept meticulously. $350,000 in total was used for the sub-project, and the records of this project were destroyed by Dr. Sidney Godaleb, who was essentially the doctor who destroyed most of the MK Ultra documents that were destroyed and are not retrievable were destroyed by Dr. Sidney Godaleb. He was the doctor that oversaw much of the medical research in MK Ultra. And I guess to keep from incriminating himself, he destroyed a lot of the records that were pertinent to this program. And the footnote in this article is that the CIA refused comment. Godaleb told a person named Les Whidden that the Atlanta project was in keeping with the kind of experiments being done at that time, and that Pfeiffer doesn't ordinarily take calls, according to a voice at his New Jersey office. So I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. I mean, these prisoners sued the federal government for $500,000 for tests that were done on them. I have not seen the results personally of this lawsuit, although I am inclined to believe it was successful. Um, um, and my main focus was the experiments themselves, as opposed to the outcome of the lawsuit. But yeah, I mean, the CIA is sitting here admitting on the record to these four prisoners' attorney, okay, a civil litigator, that yeah, we doped these guys up and it caused them psychological damage. This is on the record now. So I imagine that this matter didn't go to court and that the lawsuit was successfully settled. But that's going to be something that I follow up on in the future. Like I said, my main purpose with that article was the research itself as opposed to the details of the lawsuit. Although, yeah, we're going to re-examine this case in the future, and we'll get a little more information on that. This is the final document here, and mind you, all of these documents are true and accurate, and they are all official documents. This is a document that was produced by Radio TV Reports, which is a company that reproduces transcripts for television shows. This document was sent to the public affairs staff of ABC Evening News from the WJLA TV network, ABC. July 20th, 1977 is the date. This show aired at 7 p.m. in Washington, D.C. The subject was CIA revelations on behavior control. The presenter is Frank Reynolds. And the article reads, "There were new revelations today about cloak and dagger spy operations by our side. The CIA Director, Admiral Stansfield Turner, met with the Senate Intelligence Committee in a closed session to provide more information about MKUltra. MKUltra is a CIA program started nearly 25 years ago to control human behavior through the use of drugs, electroshock, psychosurgery, and other rather sophisticated techniques. The CIA now says that it has discovered documents relating to the program that apparently were not filed in the right place. Acting under the Freedom of Information Act, a former State Department official, John Marks, has obtained a number of other documents on MKUltra. He made them public today. Bill Downs has that story, and now the mic has been passed to Bill Downs, who is a television journalist. John Marks says that the latest CIA document shows that in 1950s, the CIA secretly contracted with an unidentified professor of neurology to go to an unnamed state prison for the experiment on an unrevealed number of convicts. The agency had learned that the Russians were testing a drug called bobolocabine, and the MKUltra, the project, its administrators wanted to know that the drug actually induced loss of willpower and memory. Another documented case involved two suspected Russian CIA agents, which the agency feared might have been compromised. Both agents were drugged and then hypnotized. They relived past incidents in their lives, the documents reports, and the interrogations were very successful. Among the MKUltra documents produced today was a 1949 letter outlining ways of killing a person without leaving evidence of murder. Try smothering with a pillow or strangling with a thick cloth or other substance. So we see, ladies and gentlemen, as I prepare to close this lecture, that there were a lot of controversial elements of this program, and when it was discovered and made public, the CIA suffered, as Admiral Stansfield Turner himself said, irreparable damage to the image of the CIA. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to bring it to the present day. Clandestine gang stalking utilizes a lot of these same tactics and tricks on private U.S. citizens like myself, ladies and gentlemen, and others who identify as targeted individuals. Now, the auspices of who becomes a targeted individual is rooted in extrajudicial secrecy. Listen to some of my past lectures concerning the methods and ways a person can become a targeted individual. It seems the easiest way is if you just simply make the wrong enemy, or if enough people report you to the right people as being a bully or destructive or harmful or mean or a jerk or violent, or you intimidate or menace people, or you are physically abusive, or a number of things that may or may not be true. It's largely based off of word of mouth, and which is disturbing. That if enough people say enough bad things about you to the right people, you could wind up in a protocol that could jeopardize your very life. But you think the CIA and the U.S. federal establishment would have learned its lesson from the lessons of people like Dr. Frank Olson, who we talked about, or a number of the experimentees in that prison who sued the American federal government for $500,000 each, or the example of some of the people like I believe his name was Harold Bauer, if I'm not mistaken, who they held down on a operating table and drugged him to his death as a part of experiments concerning MK Ultra. And so many other U.S. citizens who were drugged and harmed by these psychoactive chemicals and substances, and these behavior control modification protocols that the CIA wanted to run on people because it thought it could get away with it. See, it wanted to play God. It wanted to show the world, not just American citizens, but the whole world, we are God. We are the CIA. We are people that can manipulate people's lives from behind the shadows. We're the puppet masters of all time, the greatest puppet masters of all time, and we will show you that through these various experiments. And it got exposed, and it made the CIA look horrible. And that's what's going to happen with clandestine gang stalking. America is not going to look good when this is exposed. That's why I wish that America would stop doing tests like this, these open air psychological tests on its citizens. It always gets exposed. Okay, human beings are not here on this earth to perform these kinds of tests on other human beings. Okay, it fails time and time again. And it's failed again with clandestine gang stalking. This program has been exposed. And I think it would behoove the U.S. Federal establishment of the United States of America as a sovereign territorial entity and as a member of the global community to cease and desist further operations with clandestine gang stalking. Thank you for tuning in.